discuss this further, we're being joined by Brahma Chalani, who's a professor of strategic studies at Center for Policy Research. Mr. Chalani, always a pleasure having you here on WION World is One with us. Thank you so much for coming in. Dr. Jaishankar met Wang Yi just days ago in Astana. He insisted on how mutual respect, mutual sensitivity and mutual interest, all these three mutuals will guide India-China's bilateral ties. Now, do you see China adhering to any of these mutuals with its continuous build-up at the LAC?
China is doing the opposite. It is fortifying its defenses. It's tunneling mountains and creating underground bunkers for storing weapons and ammunition, as well as underground troop shelters. It's doing that all across the Himalayan frontier with India, stretching from eastern Ladakh to Arunachal Pradesh. Similar activity we are seeing in the middle sector on the Tibet-Uttarakhand frontier, as well as on the Tibet-Sikkim border. So this seems to indicate that China is preparing for the long haul. It may be even preparing for war. But this kind of activity certainly should raise concerns in India. India has to respond by building similar underground facilities. It's very important because in warfare, what's placed on the ground is visible by satellite reconnaissance. Your aircraft that are not underground can be taken out. Your military headquarters can be taken out. Therefore, it's very important to do what China is doing, which is to keep tunneling and keep creating underground shelters and underground storage sites, because it's very difficult to take out underground assets of a country.
Mr. Chalani, now just coming to these bilateral talks. Now, China is always ready to have these talks, these border talks with India. But does China even get the message at these bilateral meetings with India? Or are these high-profile meetings just like a tick in the box for China as they go back to their continued their older stance?
What China has done over the last more than 4 years, the military standoff with India now has entered the 5th year. It entered the 5th year in May. So we are 4 years and 2 months since the standoff began. And China has used these bilateral talks to string India along while buying time to build permanent war-fighting facilities. And its new construction along the entire frontier with India is changing the Himalayan military landscape. Now, we keep discussing, for example, China is doing this in the Pangong region. Then, a few weeks later, we'll be discussing something else, let's say on the Tibet-Sikkim frontier. We tend to forget the larger picture. The larger picture is very important. The larger picture shows that step by step, China is completely altering the Himalayan military landscape. Its construction activities are disadvantaging India. All this raises a question as to why we went in for these 4 so-called buffer zones in eastern Ladakh. These buffer zones have worked to China's advantage. In fact, despite these buffer zones, China is engaged in frenzied warfare infrastructure building. For example, the latest report that you're referring to about the Pangong military base, that military base, which is a division-level headquarters of the PLA, it has come up at the edge of the buffer zone with India. And these buffer zones, more importantly, have come up in areas on land that was traditionally patrolled by India. So these are buffer zones largely on Indian areas.
Yes.
We also withdrew for no reason from Kailash Heights. And by withdrawing from the Kailash Heights, by agreeing to these 4 different buffer zones, we undermined our negotiating leverage. That's the reason why for more than 3 years now, there has been no movement on the talks since the last buffer zone was created in 2021. So we have to now learn the lessons
Yes.
from our mistakes. We have to also look ahead and be very vigilant, because China might spring a surprise on India. This time it might be a bigger surprise than what it sprung on India in April 2020, when it furtively encroached on some key borderlands of eastern Ladakh. This time it might actually spring a nasty surprise in terms of the type that we witnessed in 1962, where they suddenly came in, invaded India, and we were caught unawares.
Yes.
That thing should never happen again.
Professor Chalani, now I obviously wanted to get your thoughts on this as well, that what stance should India be taking, but you weighed in on this, that India should build underground facilities, it should do what China is doing, and China can spring up a surprise. I wanted to slip in one more question with you. Is our diplomacy able to drive the point home when it comes to China? Or is it just in China's nature to engage but then do exactly what it wants to unilaterally?
Not just with India. If you look at China's track record with other countries, it does not respect international law. And no less surprising is the fact that it actually violates bilateral agreements with its neighbors. It has violated all the border management agreements with India. It has trashed them by not only by making these stealthy encroachments into eastern Ladakh, but by massing forces along the India border. And now by building on a continuous basis warfare-related infrastructure along the India border. But also equally important is the fact that China uses talks to buy time. It's buying time with India to create this new infrastructure, to impose on India a fait accompli. It's trying to tell India that what it has grabbed will remain in Chinese control, that it will not pull back its forces. Certainly there's no question of China respecting the line of actual control, as Dr. Jaishankar asked the Chinese foreign minister in Astana. On the contrary, this new warfare-related infrastructure indicates that China is positioning itself to seize on new openings that might arise in the months and years to come, so that it actually can not only consolidate its existing encroachments, but make new intrusions. So India has to be very vigilant, and it's very clear that this border now with China has become a hot border that India will have to patrol even in the harsh winter months. India in recent months has deployed 10,000 more troops along the Indo-Tibetan frontier, which is, I think, is a wise step, because India shouldn't be caught by surprise.
India has to be cautious. Yes, India has to be cautious.
India needs to be.
Yes, and China can spring up a surprise.
Yes, India needs to be cautious as well as vigilant.
Yes.
And India has to match China's construction activity, especially the construction of underground facilities.
All right, Professor Chalani, thank you so much for joining us and sharing all your insights. Always a pleasure speaking with you. That was Professor Brahma Chalani, Strategic Studies at Center for Policy Research, joining us right here.